some things are just proper, some things are just kind of right. And I got on Twitter and I said, okay, give me a comic to roast. Feed me, or feed me a stray cat, preferably the comic. And somebody suggested the Unworthy Thor and the Mighty Thor Generations. I'm like, right now I'm sitting in a hotel in Austin, Texas, just outside of a giant hurricane, so this might be appropriate. Oh, goodness. So, this particular comic, to no one's surprise, written by Jason Aaron. And Jason Aaron is, I've said this, other people have said this, that I've spoken to in regards to comic books, is that Jason Aaron is largely the most inconsistent writer in comic books today. He has moments where he is incredibly deep and intriguing in regards to what he puts out there, and there's other comics that are trash that he puts out there. For example, his Ghost Rider run was garbage, but Thor up to the point where Jane became Thor was good. Southern Bastards, largely garbage, but the Unworthy Thor that just came out recently was a great miniseries. So with him, you never really know what you're getting. And it's kind of unfortunate because when you see his highs, they are really, really high. But when you see his lows, they are bad enough to make you wonder, why exactly did this guy get hired? And that's unfortunate. And I think that a lot of times his lows are because he starts to get too political. Southern Bastards might as well be a middle finger to every single state in the South. He says that it's partially a love letter. Dude, I don't want to know the people that you love, because I'd be wondering if I got to send them to a battered woman's shelter or something. Anyway, cover art's not too bad, so I don't really have much to say about it. Let's go ahead and just dive into this. I'm curious about why they put the Unworthy Thor when that's clearly classic Thor. So, whatever works. So, we find here on the first page that this is a younger Thor before he's even made major appearances in the Marvel Universe, because he can't fully lift Mjolnir yet. But I find this kind of weird. I always thought that the enchantment was that if you're worthy, you just lift it. I didn't know there was half worthiness, because he's like, I can just lift it just high enough to, and then Odin comes in here and chastises him. My thought is this, being half worthy, isn't that like being half pregnant? You're either worthy or you're not worthy. But anyway, so Odin basically chastises Thor for basically being obsessed with lifting Mjolnir. They have a conversation basically that, Thor is frustrated. He's not quite sure exactly what he needs to do to lift this hammer. It's similar to some stuff that was discussed in the comic The Unworthy Thor. So I'm guessing that's why they call it the Mighty Thor and the Unworthy Thor for this generation, just because thematically there's some similarities. I don't know. But anyway, Odin continues the chastisement, says, get in your formal garb and get out to the throne room because we got guests coming in. And we see, of course, there's this giant ball. Everybody's there. Valkyrie, Sif, Volstagg, etc. You see Balder in there. And Thor, of course, is complaining about his clothes because why not? Which, actually, I find this kind of weird because the formal wear that he's wearing right now, although not as awesome as the costume that J. Michael Straczynski and Oliver Copiel came up with, which is the one that is used in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it's his classic outfit, so I don't understand the gripe here. Maybe it's just Jason Aaron taking a dig at it. Either way, I'm not a fan. So, anyway, he wants to get drunk. Can't say I blame him, because formal events can be boring. But he starts griping about, no hammer, no Midgard, no mead. Calls his dad a bastard. Then says something about no riding goats or hearing prayers. And then he turns his head and then he's gone. Can't really blame him. He just, yeah. He He's a Viking. He wants to get drunk. But from what we find out in the next page is that Thor is on his goat with an axe, and it's just, it's the same axe that he's using nowadays. And it says, the prayer that soared across the heavens to the ears of the Thunder God was a prayer of desperation, a prayer from Midgard, from one of Thor's most devoted followers. So, the Vikings are praying for Thor, and there's a black Viking in there. Why? Why? Like, I don't understand. I was unaware that there were, like, black Vikings. I can understand, let me put it this way, because people are going to be like, well, why would you complain about that? I understand in the Marvel Cinematic Universe why Heimdall and Valkyrie are black, because really the Asgardians are not gods. They're actually just a super advanced race of aliens. But this is somebody on Earth. There wouldn't be any black people in with the Vikings. So I find that a little weird. It's like you're just shoving that in there to shove that in there. Not to mention, there weren't that many women that traveled with the Vikings anyway and fought. You hear some reports of shield maidens, but there weren't that many of them. And Sargon Armakad does a really good breakdown of it in an older video of his. So definitely feel free to look that up. But the Vikings have managed to stumble across Egypt. The Nile River, specifically. So they get into a fight with Egyptians. And lo and behold, this land is defended by none other than En-Sabah-Nur. So we get Thor versus Apocalypse, which is always fun. But we see the Clan Akaba, and it's basically going to be a one giant brawl. And then after that, Femme Thor shows up. And I will say this, I hate the concept of Jane Foster as Thor. I still think it's forced. But I will say I do like this imagery here of her coming out of the thunder. I think that's a cool look. And then, of course, there's some confusion, because of course there is. Because, why wouldn't there be? I mean, okay, look at this from Thor's perspective. So lightning just flashed, and now there's a female version of me, and she's holding the hammer that I have been having problems holding. I feel like I've been ensnared here with the dialogue. A woman, Thor, do not be ridiculous. Did my father send you here to torment me? Is that why you're holding my birthright, my Mjolnir? How are you holding Mjolnir? How is a wench worthy of the hammer when Thor is not? And she goes, perhaps because you use words like wench. Okay. So, I feel like I've been ensnared here just because I'm one of the people who does not like a female Thor. I think that it's silly and it's forced, and Jason Aaron, has basically taken the concept and really done nothing that intriguing with it, on top of, force feeding people the feminism card, basically using the absorbing man as, a self-insert of what he thinks of the fandom. And, again, that was a really crass move on his part. I'm really, really, really not a fan of that. I think that the fact that Marvel writers, do that in their comics shows that they're really not mature enough to be doing this on a professional level. That they should, honestly, I'm of the opinion that a lot of major Marvel writers who have such disdain for the fandom really should just quit working for Marvel and go over to Image and just do stuff for Image. Because if you can't handle working for the biggest comics imprint in the world, if you can't handle that sort of responsibility and that sort of fan reaction to your work, you probably shouldn't be doing what you're doing, talented as you are. So now here's the flip side of this, is that Aaron does kind of cover his ass, saying here, this is clearly not the Odinson I know, and I've known him for a very long time. I guess the question shouldn't be where am I, but when am I? So what Jane here is basically asserting is that, okay, this is probably a Thor that's very young, doesn't know how to talk to women, isn't who we know as the audience. He's very crass, he's very obnoxious, he's just bloodthirsty. He's just looking to whip some ass, which, is, again, it kind of feels like the writer covering his ass a little bit so that, the fan base doesn't get too angry at him. But, it's damage done by that point, because I've read comics with a younger Thor. There's a mini-series that tackles Thor when he was younger, when he was unable to lift Mjolnir yet, and was about kind of the trials that he had to go through to lift Mjolnir. And he never, ever acted like that. So, yeah, it's a bit weird. So she notices the Vikings, realizes that she's in the past, sorry for my yawning, and lo and behold, again, another black dude, or ambiguously brown dude, or maybe it's Khal Drogo, I don't know, but again, why? Like, why are we forcing diversity into Vikings? This is a one-shot comic, it doesn't matter. Anyway, Apocalypse says, oh god, now they're making Apocalypse a sexist, calling her a concubine. Ugh. And then a fight ensues. And from here, I'm not going to lie, the comic gets better. The fight is intriguing. It gives you a bit of a look into the mind of Jane Foster. The only issue that I have with this is, he's had so many issues to discuss Jane and the struggle and so on and so forth. And if this is for, to kind of introduce these people to this character of Jane Foster as Thor, which is basically a very different version of Jane Foster that you know and love, because she doesn't act like Jane at all, unless she's in one of those moments where she's actually being kind to Thor. But anyway, it doesn't really endear me to her. It doesn't really do anything for me, so it's kind of unfortunate. So then Thor, lands in a bunch of soldiers from Clan Akaba, beats the crap out of a bunch of them, and then rallies the Vikings, and they charge into combat. Meanwhile, Jane is struggling with Apocalypse, and then we see, how Thor basically inspires people. You see his leadership. And then Loki shows up, for some reason, and gets hit in the face. And yeah, all we learn is that he guided the Vikings toward Ensabanor, and that's about it. So Jane flies back into the battle, and I'll say this, I do like this little page here of Thor Odinson and Jane Foster going into battle, except for one problem. Dear God, look at Jane's face. It looks like they almost copy-pasted Thor's snarl and Jane's snarl in a weird way, except James is like exposing more gums, and they're black. God. Like the rest of the coloring and stuff I kind of dig, but like they're making Jane look a little bit too mannish. I'm not a fan, and it continues. Like they're like, as this comic goes on, her jaw gets more and more square. But yeah, they beat the shit out of Apocalypse as expected. That's really the long and short of it. Is the two of them talk at the end of this, and basically he and her, talk about the fact that she's from the future. Yeah, it's nothing special. Like that's kind of like the only thing I can say about this book in general. It's nothing special. There's nothing to it. It just kind of exists. The only interesting part that I think that I found about this is that at the end of it sets up this idea that Odin and the Phoenix Force had a romantic relationship at some point. That I find intriguing. That I'm interested in learning about. Because Odin is such a Mac Daddy that he sleeps with multi-dimensional forces. Oh God. That's hilarious. Alright. So I'll admit, I can't really recommend this book. I know Mim Headroom did Generations Jean Grey, and I guess this is the one I get to do. And I gotta say, man, this is just it's just nothing really to mention. It just kind of exists. It's got one interesting little hook at the end of it, but the rest of it is just, a by the numbers time traveling hero story. Ooh, look, Jean went back in time and she found Thor, and oh, here's Apocalypse, and we gotta beat him up now, and yada yada yada. It is what it is. It's just there. It just exists, and in a weird way, I find mediocrity to be almost as insulting as, you know, being a bad comic. So it's not a bad comic. It's just mediocre. It's just kind of there. So we didn't get a good Jason Aaron comic. We didn't get a bad Jason Aaron comic. We got a by the numbers Jason Aaron comic. Oh God. So yeah. Well, if nothing else, at least the storms are still raging outside. Maybe somebody pissed off Thor in my neck of the woods. Anyway, I wouldn't mind hearing what you guys thought about this comic. Just let me know in the comments below. Don't forget, of course, to donate to my Patreon if you could, just so I can afford to read more comics like this. Plus, Hat and I are going to be starting up the studio in the winter, so we're looking to save up as much money as we can for equipment costs, for moving costs, the whole 9 yards, and so we can continue to provide you guys with more kick-ass content every week. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off, guys. If you liked the video, of course, smash that like button for me, share it wherever you can. My name is Micah Curtis. I'll see you next time. Dave's Fault.